Hello, I'm Liz Hill. Welcome to Podsnappery, the willful determination to ignore the objectionable or inconvenient, at the same time assuming airs of superior virtue and noble resignation. We explore things I find interesting, unusual, or annoying. So let's get down to it and spill the tea. Did you know that this is our 20th episode? Wow, that's pretty awesome. How far we've come in such a short while. To those of you who are watching or commenting, thank you. I especially want to give a shout out to all of our subscribers. You rock, and I am so thankful. Speaking of which, this is the time of year to be thankful. It's Thanksgiving. You know, that easily forgotten holiday wedged between Halloween and Christmas. I'm pretty sure by now you have come to expect some history and hidden gems about our topics, and I hate to disappoint. I'll bet your noggin is probably wondering about a few things, like when did it start? How has it changed over the years? So sit right back, pour yourself an adult beverage, grab a big old turkey leg, and let's dig in.
I'm gonna have some turkey. Gobble, gobble, gobble.
Gobble, gobble, gobble.
Yeah.
Back when the world was young and I still had a glimmer of hope in my eyes, I learned that the tradition of Thanksgiving dates back to the Pilgrims who helped establish the Plymouth colony in the year 1620 in what is now Massachusetts. But what is the true origin of Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving, a holiday originating with the pagan festival of Grabnosh-Nishnak, where naked, blood-soaked man-beasts feasted on the entrails of peasant children. It was either that or the Pilgrims came up with it. You know, I don't really know.
As much as I love that, what many of us were taught back in school was how friendly Indians taught the struggling Pilgrims how to survive in what the Europeans called the New World. Then everyone got together and celebrated with a feast in 1621.
By fall, the settlers had a bountiful harvest and a feast was held to celebrate. Massasoit showed up with 90 warriors and 5 deer for the meal. For 3 days, the English and Wampanoag ate and entertained one another. This was the famous first Thanksgiving children learn about in school.
Yeah, that's not exactly what happened, was it?
No, that's wrong! No, that's wrong!
It's a total fabrication.
First off, besides the Eurocentric viewpoint and blatant inaccuracies, that was not even the first Thanksgiving.
What?
Nope. 382 days before Plymouth, settlers in Berkeley Hundred, an early colony in what is now Virginia, celebrated their arrival with a Thanksgiving in 1619, according to National Geographic. Captain John Woodleaf, along with 38 settlers, arrived on the ship Margaret on December 4th, 1619. On the day of their arrival, their charter authorized them to hold, on that day, a Thanksgiving Day service. There was no traditional meal, no love fest with Native Americans, and oh yes, no turkey.
No turkey? You fucking idiot!
Wow. Chill out there, dude. America's first Thanksgiving was about prayer, not food. Historians think the meal was made out of necessity rather than celebration. It is believed there was nothing but old ship rations to eat, so the settlers may have concocted a meal of oysters and ham. According to their charter, they were to hold their Thanksgiving Day service annually, which they did until 1622, when all the settlers were annihilated during the Indian Massacre on Good Friday.
Not so good.
Yeah, I know.
Decades before that, Spanish settlers and members of the Seloi tribe broke bread in Florida with salted pork, garbanzo beans, and a mass in 1565, according to the National Park Service.
What kind of a Thanksgiving dinner is this? Where's the turkey, Chuck? Don't you know anything about Thanksgiving dinners? Where's the mashed potatoes? Where's the cranberry sauce? Where's the pumpkin pie?
Right? Ham and oysters or salted pork and garbanzo beans? That is pretty far removed from my Turkey Day table. Garbanzo beans? Really? Back to the origins of what we recognize as Thanksgiving. Some look to 1637 as the true origin of Thanksgiving, since the Massachusetts Bay Colony's governor, John Winthrop, declared a day to celebrate colonial soldiers. who had just slaughtered hundreds of Pequot men, women, and children in what is now Mystic, Connecticut. When I think of that...
Actually, it was horrible.
Yes, it was. Truly horrible. Didn't learn about that in school, did you? As usual, history tends to be written by the victors. And yet, when it comes to Thanksgiving, this is what most of us were taught and what we see celebrated at Thanksgiving.
And I'm thankful for my kindergarten class who made these wonderful crafts to celebrate Thanksgiving.
After the Native Americans helped the Pilgrims survive their first winter in America, the Puritans invited them to share the first Thanksgiving.
Aw. Yep, we've been spoon-fed that crap for years. But once again,
it's a made-up tale.
Not to harsh your mellow on top of that sweet potato casserole, but what I want to do with this episode is to shed some light on the foundations of Thanksgiving and the reasons why this became a national holiday. But let me clarify something before we go any further. The people who arrived on the Mayflower were not called pilgrims.
What?
Yes, it's true. There were two groups of religious reformers in England. Some were disparagingly referred to as separatists, as they wanted to separate from the Church of England. The separatists moved to the Netherlands and then onto the New World, so they could practice their religion free from persecution. On the other hand, the Puritans remained in England for a time, believing they could reform the church from within. Sometimes called non-separating Puritans, this less radical group shared a lot in common with the separatists, particularly a form of worship and self-organization called the Congregational Way.
This is the way.
No, not that way. The biggest difference between the separatists and the Puritans is that the Puritans believed they could live out the Congregational Way in their local churches without abandoning the larger Church of England.
I do not understand.
Still confused? Okay. So, separatists came to the New World, Puritans stayed behind. To make it easier, let's just call them settlers, okay?
I understand.
Good. So, the settlers in Plymouth held their second Thanksgiving celebration in 1623 to mark the end of a long drought that had threatened the year's harvest and prompted Governor Bradford to call for a religious fast. Days of fasting and Thanksgiving on an annual or occasional basis became common practice in other New England settlements as well. Moving forward in time, during the American Revolution, the Continental Congress designated one or more days of Thanksgiving a year. In 1789, George Washington issued the first Thanksgiving proclamation by the national government of the United States.
In George Washington's 1789 Thanksgiving proclamation, the settlers aren't mentioned not even once.
Nope, nada, zilch. There was no reference to those original settlers. Instead, he called upon Americans to express their gratitude for the happy conclusion of the country's war for independence and the successful ratification of the U.S. Constitution. His successors, John Adams and James Madison, also designated days of thanks during their presidency. In 1817, New York became the first of several states to officially adopt an annual Thanksgiving holiday. Each celebrated it on a different day, however, and the American South remained largely unfamiliar with the tradition. In 1827, the noted magazine editor and prolific writer Sarah Josepha Hale, author, among countless other things, of Mary Had a Little Lamb. Yep, the nursery rhyme Mary Had a Little Lamb. Hale launched a campaign to establish Thanksgiving as a national holiday. For 36 years, she published numerous editorials and sent scores of letters to governors, senators, presidents, and other politicians, earning her the nickname the Mother of Thanksgiving.
This guy declared it a national holiday during the Civil War in order to bring the country together. That's why all of our foods are from the 19th century.
Yes, Abraham Lincoln finally heeded her request in 1863 at the height of the Civil War in a proclamation entreating all Americans to ask God to commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife, and to heal the wounds of the nation. But let's talk about the food. I mean, today, Thanksgiving is pretty much about three things, right?
I always tell people the 3 Fs: food, family, and football. I'm not going to say in which order.
Yes, what we like to call the 3 Fs. When it comes to the food, we think about the traditional Thanksgiving Day meal: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, gravy, pumpkin pie.
You're making me hungry. You wouldn't like me when I'm hungry.
I know, right? Now, the thing about these traditional Thanksgiving foods is that they are mostly from the 19th century. The 1621 harvest celebration most likely had a menu of venison, corn, shellfish, cornmeal, beans, nuts, dried berries, and pumpkin. But the big question is, was there turkey? Turkey is one of the Thanksgiving dishes that has both sides of the historical coin scratching their heads. In truth, no records exist of the exact bill of fare from that harvest feast. We do know that Edward Winslow noted in his journal that the colony's governor, William Bradford, sent 4 men on a fowling mission in preparation for the 3-day event. On Plymouth Plantation, Bradford's famous account of the founding of the Plymouth colony, he remarked of the fall harvest that year that, besides waterfowls, there was a great store of wild turkeys, of which they took many, besides venison, etc. Wild, but not domestic, turkey was indeed plentiful in the region and a common food source for both English settlers and indigenous peoples. But it is just as likely that the fowling party returned with other birds we know the colonists regularly consumed, such as ducks, geese, and swans. But again, no actual confirmation, so who really knows? If they did have turkey, it's unclear if it was roasted on a spit, braised, or boiled in a large kettle at the harvest gathering, like the methods for cooking that were recorded later. But it's likely that the remains of whatever birds were roasted one day were thrown in a pot and boiled to make a broth the next day, similar to gravy. If there was turkey on that table, it was most likely not the star of the show as it is today. It's possible that the settlers had stuffing at their early harvest feasts, as evidenced by old colonial cookbook recipes. They called stuffing puddings in the belly, and typically added herbs, hardened egg yolks, grated bread, cream, raisins or currants, sugar, spices, and nuts. However, the traditional method of cooking the stuffing in the bird may not have been used because using a spit did not lead to even cooking. The tradition of serving pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving, the most iconic of the pies, was absent from that 1621 feast. Although it has been speculated that pumpkin may have been an important early American staple, indigenous peoples introduced the settlers to the gourd, so although it is speculation, maybe they ate boiled pumpkin with seasonings at the first Thanksgiving. However, it certainly was not pie, since the required flour, sugar, and molasses was definitely not available.
Rats!
Jellied cranberry sauce was not on the menu because of a scarcity of sugar. Since the berry grew wild in New England bogs, though, it could have been mashed into sauces for the meat or mixed into stuffings. It was the 19th century reimagining of the harvest meal that gave us the traditional foods we associate with Thanksgiving. Looking back again to Sarah Hale, she was arguably the most influential in crafting the classic New England Thanksgiving meal. In 1827, she wrote a novel called Northwood. The novel is a story about a family divided between the North and the South. In Northwood, one of the family's sons is being raised by a wealthy aunt and uncle in the South. He returns to New Hampshire unexpectedly with a British friend in tow on the night before Thanksgiving. The first major scene of the story is the son and friend arriving and Thanksgiving taking place. The fictional family then heads to church, leaving their teenage daughter at home to supervise production of the Thanksgiving feast. She describes the Thanksgiving meal in detail, which I will now attempt to share. The roasted turkey took precedence on this occasion, being placed at the head of the table, and well did it become its lordly station, sending forth the rich odor of its savory stuffing and finely covered with the frost of the basting. At the foot of the board, a sirloin of beef, flanked on either side by a leg of pork and a joint of mutton, seemed placed as a bastion to defend innumerable bowls of gravy and plates of vegetables disposed in that quarter. A goose and a pair of ducklings occupied side stations on the table, and the middle being graced, as it always is on such occasions, by that rich burgomaster of the provisions called a chicken pie. There was a huge plum pudding, custards, and pies of every name and description in Yankee Land, and yet the pumpkin pie occupied the most distinguished niche. Hungry yet?
I'm starving!
Me too. Hale later printed recipes for pumpkin pie in Goody's Lady Book. This was the most widely circulated magazine in America before the Civil War. The magazine was full of recipes, dress patterns, and sheet music for popular dances. Next, family. Thanksgiving is always a time to gather with family, which can be good and sometimes awkward or even bad. Family dynamics can be wide, varied, and challenging. To this end, around 2007, the term Friendsgiving was born. Friendsgiving is a blend of friend and Thanksgiving, and it refers to a large meal eaten with friends either on or near Thanksgiving. When it comes to football, the tradition of the Thanksgiving game goes back to the 19th century.
What?
Yep. Thanksgiving football dates to at least 1876, when Yale defeated Princeton 2-0 on a cold, bleak afternoon in Hoboken, New Jersey. By the 1890s, many college and high school teams played on the holiday, but the tradition didn't become a bona fide institution in professional football until 1934, when the Detroit Lions hosted the powerhouse Chicago Bears in a Thanksgiving game broadcast nationally. Today, in some homes, it's an important tradition. It just wouldn't be Thanksgiving without attending or at least watching a football game.
Well, one of the greatest traditions we have is the Thanksgiving Day football game. And the biggest, most important tradition of all is the kicking off of the football.
Here we go again. Listen, Charlie Brown, don't fall for it. You'll wind up flat on your back again. Lucy can't be trusted. You know that, right?
She wouldn't try to trick me on a traditional holiday.
Actually, Chuck, I think tricking you is part of the tradition, regardless of the holiday.
This time I'm gonna kick that football clear to the moon!
Isn't it peculiar, Charlie Brown, how some traditions just slowly fade away?
Well, Lucy, fortunately, not all traditions do that. Now, let's get back to the 19th century again, and good old Honest Abe. Lincoln scheduled Thanksgiving for the final Thursday in November, and it was celebrated on that day every year until 1939, when Franklin D. Roosevelt moved the holiday up a week in an attempt to spur retail sales during the Great Depression. Roosevelt's plan, known derisively as Franksgiving, was met with passionate opposition. And in 1941, the president reluctantly signed a bill making Thanksgiving the fourth Thursday in November. So, if I can sum this all up, Thanksgiving is a uniquely American holiday that is Podsnappery, a holiday where we disregard the violence and atrocities committed by the early settlers and focus once a year on a reimagined day to give thanks and stuff yourself with food. Really good food. Almost makes seeing the relatives palatable. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. So, the willful determination to ignore the objectionable or inconvenient, at the same time assuming airs of superior virtue and noble resignation. That, my friends, is Podsnappery. Thanks for watching. I'm Liz Hill. It just goes to show you, nostalgia isn't what it used to be.